Great
really
show.
Well,
fun, but
hey guys, do you know what show people aren't watching? Apparently, it's Star Trek because Star Trek is dying.
he hates it.
And before we get into this, I want to welcome Tom Connors Jr. to the panel. Glad you could join us today, Tom.
Star Trek
very
has
kind
been
of you to
dead
show
for
up.
like a decade.
I know, right?
Well, everyone knows this, except apparently, Paramount was a little bit not so quick to acknowledge this.
Wait, is that a Mad Max movie? Is that what that's?
No, so this is Section 31, and this is an article where basically this guy, this actor here, I think his name is Rob Kaczynski. Basically, he considers himself to be a true Star Trek fan, and when he was approached to be in this movie, he was like, "Who the fuck wants to watch a movie about Section 31?" And on this podcast, he was like, "When I got this job, I was like, why are they doing a Section 31 movie? It's going to be hated from the get-go. No one's going to want to watch a Section 31 movie, and we're doing a TV budget movie. This isn't going to be what people want." Then I spoke to Alex Kurtzman, and I spoke to the director of the special, and they explained to me that Star Trek is dying. I don't know if people know that. I was talking about Star Trek at the gym. I'm a boxer, and I train with a lot of kids, and none of them knew what Star Trek was. Can you imagine that? I mean, just conceive of that for a second. I would say Star Trek, and they were like, Star Wars? And I'm like, no, Star Trek. And they're like, I think I've heard of it. Now, that was pretty upsetting for me. Star Trek's fan base has never been enormous. It's always been small and incredibly passionate group. It's never compared to the Harry Potter fan groups or the Star Wars fan groups. It's never had hundreds of millions of fans around the world. I don't know about that.
What?
It's always been a dedicated group, and that dedicated group is aging, and we really are going to lose Star Trek if we don't bring in new fans, new eyes, and new ways of getting people to love the things that we love. Once I'd heard this, I was 100% behind the movie. It was, you have to make different flavors of Star Trek for a different time. You have to try to bring in new people, as that's what Starfleet Academy is going to be about. That's what Section 31 is about. I'm sorry to say it. It wasn't made for the people that love Star Trek. It was made to make people want to learn more about Star Trek. That was the idea. It was for it to bring in new eyes and new people to introduce them to that world. Now, guys, I'm a big believer in the idea that, like, if you make stuff that's not for a fan base, then it's not really for that fan base, right? So I want to throw this to Robert. Robert, what's your take on this, that Alex Kurtzman fully admits that Star Trek is dying, but he doesn't seem to want to admit that he's the one responsible for it dying because he's not making Star Trek shows. He's making a hybrid Star Wars thing.
Well, look, first and foremost, Star Trek worked because it's allegorical. And in a science fiction fantasy context, Star Trek was telling stories about our world today. I mean, meaning what was going on when it came out in the 60s. And it was addressing things in a provocative way that people would sit down and pay attention to. Didn't matter what your political affiliation was, because what was going on in Star Trek's shows was out there. It was, to boldly go where no one has gone before, out in the universe. So you could watch these thoughtful, beautifully written shows that were addressing issues of the day, but in a science fiction fantasy context, the same way that Rod Serling did that with The Twilight Zone. So people could watch these provocative shows and be provoked, be thoughtfully provoked by them, and sit down and watch heroic characters basically be put through their paces. But at the same time, it offered you something to chew on. Star Trek never told you what to think, but it presented you things to think about that related basically back to your own life. I mean, it dealt with emotional issues. It dealt with political issues. It dealt with spiritual issues. It dealt with all kinds of things that we as human beings deal with in our daily lives. But they did it with that was the inside chewy nuggets, but you had a beautiful hard candy shell that tasted like a cherry Jolly Rancher. And that was the sci-fi of it all. And the thing about Star Trek today is it's not about anything. What they've done is they've taken what the iconography of Star Trek, and they're making shows that have there's nothing thoughtful about them. You know, like they introduced the Gorn in Strange New Worlds. They didn't do any, like, the thing about Star Trek is it never had villains. It had antagonists. And there were always times when, like when they first introduced the Gorn, when I was a kid, it blew my mind. When you think this giant lizard monster needs to be vanquished because they're evil, they've attacked a Federation outpost. And then Kirk is put on a battle to the death on this asteroid. And when he's about to deliver the killing blow, he says, you know what? Maybe we're wrong. Maybe you thought that your space was being encroached upon, and we just didn't know it. And Kirk realizes that it would be wrong for me to kill my opponent because we don't know enough about them for me to take his life. And then, of course, the omnipotent alien Metron shows up and says, wow, that's a quality of mercy. We've scanned your ships, but we didn't know that you had that in you. Maybe we'll spare both of your lives. You can go back to your ships. And we've seen, maybe in 1,000 years or 2,000, how many thousand years? If it was a trivia question, I'd lose that one. But you're left with a moment of hope that Kirk's humanity in sparing this creature is something that a much more advanced alien race took a look at and said, you know, you humans, there's potential there. So that's an hour-long show. When that show ends, me as a kid, I'm like, wow. And it gave me something to think about because it didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. Well, if you look at what Strange New Worlds has done to the Gorn, they've made them a generic monster race that is half xenomorph from the Alien franchise and half werewolf or whatever the hell they are. And they've turned them in. They've reduced them. It's so reductive. And the people writing this show, I got to say, they're dumb. They're not smart people. And they're doing what so many fantasy TV writers are today. They all grew up watching Buffy and Angel, and they only can write shows like Buffy and Angel. Star Trek has all become about interpersonal relationships. Everybody's shipping everybody else. Is Spock going to get together with Nurse Chapel, or is he going to keep T'Pring as his bride? It's so monumentally stupid. It has nothing to say. And yet people have embraced it because it looks like Star Trek, and you've got a very handsome man at the front of it. And there's no chain of command on that show. It's like, hey, I'm going to make dinner for only the principal characters. Doesn't matter whether you're a yeoman or whether what you just the principals. All of you come to my cabin, and you know half that. They did the singing show, which Buffy pioneered. You know, once more with feeling. I mean, maybe Cop Rock did it before that, but these shows are written by people that have nothing to say. They haven't read books. They certainly haven't read any science fiction. And they're not even keeping up. Star Trek, I mean, you could make, if somebody asked me, like, I don't know, off the top of my head right now, why not do a show about quantum computing or living in a simulation or any myriad of things? What happens if humanity suddenly is immortal? You know, like you could do a riff on what they did badly in Torchwood Miracle Day. But what would happen then? There's so many stories that you could they don't know how. And Section 31 felt like, I don't know, an Empire picture Charlie Band would have made. In like, it was like Metal Storm, the destruction of Jared Sin, that came out in 1983. And it was in 3D, which still wasn't good. But that's what they gave. What they think Section 31 is the most brain dead, stupid shit ever, because nobody went back and watched the episodes where Section 31 was introduced. They think it's like the CIA. I mean, it was introduced in Deep Space Nine. It was one guy who would show up. No one really knew what Section 31 was. Now they have membership cards and a headquarters and a bunch of ships. It's so dumb. And if they made it smarter, look at this. Look at the sci-fi that does well. Battlestar Galactica, The Expanse. People are going back and rewatching Babylon 5, X-Files when it was really smart. People want science fiction, their fantasy. Even Buffy, the shows that they emulate, was way smarter than any of the drivel these writers are giving us today. And now we're going to get, by the way, we still have 4 Kurtzman seasons of Star Trek coming. We have Strange New World seasons 3 and 4, and we have Starfleet Academy seasons 1 and 2. So there's going to be 4 more years of this insulting, brain dead, stupid, whatever.
Rob, what do you think about Kaczynski's claim here that Alex Kurtzman told him directly that Star Trek's dying?
Well, it's dying because it's no longer relevant. They're not presenting an audience, the traditional audience. Look, whether you're watching overt fantasy like Star Wars, there's still enough to chew on. I mean, I remember seeing Empire when I was 13 years old, and the life lessons that Yoda was imparting, you couldn't walk out of that theater and not go, do or do not. There is no try. I still think that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an old man with one foot in the grave, and I got a big Yoda right behind me, and I'm still thinking about what he said in a theater in 1980 to me in May, and it resonates. And that's why people love this stuff. And I'll tell you something. That's why kids today are gravitating more toward manga and anime, because those shows are much more thoughtful, much more interesting. They have a lot more to say. They're not afraid of emotion. They're not afraid of portraying real human connection. I mean, the thing about Star Trek Strange New Worlds and modern Star Trek is it feels fake.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're watching a facsimile of what they thought Star Trek was, but then they didn't really want to make that, so they want to make it more like Star Wars. And it's you can tell it is inauthentic.
Yeah, Japan isn't really worried about the DEI and stuff over there. You're not going to see Stacey Abrams up for president of the universe in a Japanese show.
I mean,
It's
look,
just
and you can still
crazy.
buy girls' panties in vending machines.
Yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
and the whole thing with
I can attest that's
Kurtzman
very true. You
saying-
can.
Yeah, I know. And the thing is, they understand that human beings are human beings. Guys like boobs. I mean,
Yeah.
the like every other place in the world understands this. But now, I mean, that's another thing. Star Trek, for all of its, Vulcan pawing at Nurse Chapel, and sometimes you'll see Spock take his shirt off. It's like everything else. It's all chaste. You knew that Kirk would get some. You knew. And people wanted to, getting sex was good in Star Trek. And that was another thing. I mean, it was an unspoken, the lust for life was part of Star Trek, and the universe is a lusty place. We've killed all that. We live in the most weirdly sanitized, I'm only going to look at OnlyFans girls through a computer screen. I don't want to actually go out and kiss one.
yeah.
God.
Hey,
And Star Trek is sexy, man. And we live in a sexless, commodified, can I kiss you or do we have to have a contract world? Ugh, horrible.
Go ahead, Tom. You had something to say. Tom.
Tommy. He left.
Well, Brian, I wanted to ask you this, since next to Rob, you're probably one of the biggest Star Trek nerds on the panel. So what do you think about Alex Kurtzman basically admitting that Star Trek is dying, and it's dying under his watch? And so basically they're saying like, hey, let's make stuff that the Star Trek fan base doesn't care about and, try to pull in new viewers. What do you think about that strategy?
Well, yeah, Star Trek might be dying, but it's not dying because it's irrelevant. It's dying because he has destroyed this. He destroyed the franchise by, it's not just him. It's him and other people who have tried to use Star Trek to push an agenda. They thought that the current fan base would never leave, and that they're like, we're going to go for a new fan base, and we're cool because the current fan base is so rabid that they're going to watch no matter what. And that's the problem a lot of these franchises have. They think they take the fan base that they grew for decades for granted.
Yes, they do.
They assume that we're going to show up and go along and be preached at while they destroy something we love, why they canonically destroy something we love. I can't, I will never forgive them for the episode with Khan, where they, thank you, Rob, where they basically admitted to completely modifying the canon, effectively making a third branch timeline. And then when you brought it up, the crazy brainwashed minority of fans out there that are still following this crap are like, no, it's not their timeline because this person, Akiva, said so. Who cares what Akiva said? Canonically, in Star Trek, in the story, you have made 3 timelines. Oh, no, Akiva said it's not. So Akiva said they're just modifying it. Yeah, that's what you're doing. You're creating a third timeline. They think we're so stupid that they can just modify things on the fly because it suits the writing. So, A, it's poor writing, it's lazy writing. B, it's taking us for granted. And while they take us for granted, while they turn around and assume we're going to watch everything that they put out, they're also trying to get a new fan base. And Rob's right, the fan base they're trying to get is a bunch of vapid, unassuming, just bottom of the barrel fans that aren't going to buy your merch, that aren't going to support your conventions, that are not going to be rabid about your fan base because they're not rabid about your fandom because they're not rabid about anything. They don't care about anything but themselves. They're the most selfish generation. So you're going for the most selfish, entitled generation that exists. When you could have pleased the original fans, which, by the way, I just completely disagree that Star Trek is not as popular as Star Wars. That's insane. Like, maybe Star Wars is more in the pop culture, but Star Trek is at least number 2, the biggest science fiction franchise of all time. So it's so weird to hear like the current head of Star Trek saying that. But regardless, if you actually pleased the existing fan base, us, we would have brought fans into the movement. We would have brought people. My kids, my 13-year-old daughters would have been watching Star Trek. Because I would have been watching Star Trek. Because I started watching Star Trek because my dad watched Star Trek. It's a generational thing. But when you lose the previous generation, guess what? Now you got to work on getting that generation with marketing by putting out vapid non-CW nonsense. And what are we going to get? We're going to get Starfleet Academy is basically going to be CW Star Trek.
Well, it could have been the Paper Chase in space. It could have been Dead Poets Society in space. It could have been School Ties. It could have been even I Love Alan Parker's Fame. If there are things you would go back. I don't know if the Paper Chase is old. It was a 70s movie that was turned into a show, but it was about law school, Harvard Law, and there was a professor played by John Houseman, Professor Kingsfield, who's one of the greatest characters on TV, and he was a very strict disciplinarian and demanded excellence from his students. Nowadays, the world's changed.
I would like to get Tom Connors Jr.'s opinion on Tom. How do you think Paramount and Alex Kurtzman's Secret Hideout is handling this franchise?
Well, Brian's really kind of off. Star Trek is not very big. In fact, the whole reason they brought JJ in to begin with is because the show had died and it only had 4 million viewers on Enterprise. As far as CBS was concerned, it was a dead franchise. So as far as they see it, JJ brought it back from the dead. And as I've been saying to people for years, Alex Kurtzman is doing them a favor as far as they're concerned. He sees this show. This confirms exactly what I've been telling people. He sees this as a dead franchise, and he is slumming it doing Star Trek for CBS because it is basically a dead... Yes, he's part of the reason it's dead. But at that point, it was already dead. He don't care. He'll never admit to killing it. Not once. So why would he? Because he's doing exactly what they asked him to do. Make the show look like the Star Trek 09 movie. That's all he's been charged with. And he's doing just that. And we don't see Alex Kurtzman they don't see Alex Kurtzman the same way we do, right? They see him as the guy who successfully produced shows like Hawaii Five-0 and all this other stuff like that.
Limitless.
Yeah, Limitless and all these other shows. They don't see him as the guy who fucked up Star Trek. The only time he ever got any flack from Hollywood is when he fucked up Clarice. Because that was supposed to be a big deal for CBS. They could give a shit what he does about Star Trek. They have ruined it, and they don't care because it doesn't sell anything. They literally, we were talking literally like teens of, if not tens of millions of dollars in merchandise now compared to what it used to be.
Yeah, but you would be selling that merchandise if it was still being made correctly. It's older fans, and that
you got to cater to that base
that foster in the next base that are no longer supporting it. Like how many Discovery things were selling prior to like a TNG merch or a TOS merch? Nothing.
Brian, back when I worked at Paramount, Star Trek was known as the Golden Goose, right? It was a small but hardcore fan base, and as long as they were able to make a movie for like $30 million, they would rake in the dough, And it wasn't until they started getting into the JJ era where they were spending $100+ million on these Star Trek movies, where they're like, why aren't we getting a return on our investment? So like they kind of fail. They've always failed to understand the fan base. But I want to throw this to Odin real quick, because Odin, when Section 31 came out, it was panned by critics and fans alike. It racked up only 170 million minutes viewed. And this was I think it was a 2-hour, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, 2-hour mini movie, essentially.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. So,
And it
we've
sets
seen,
up a sequel, which we all know is never going to happen.
yeah, and we've seen stuff where it's like The Acolyte boasted that it got something like 3 point something billion minutes viewed for its debut, episode, and that ended up getting canceled. And here you have this moderately budgeted with like Michelle Yeoh, who's a Academy Award winner, and it's only getting 170 million views and just getting panned by critics alike. Do you think that, like, what does it have to take to tell Alex Kurtzman that his strategy of trying to get new viewers in is failing?
At this point, I just don't know. I'm not as big of a Trekkie as many others on this panel or in the audience. I always mention this. It's a broken record, but my knowledge of Star Trek really is DS9. I've seen all of it, and I loved it. I've obviously seen a handful of the original episodes, a handful of Next Gen, and my plan over the summer is to start to go through all of those as well. And I think that really it comes down to ego. And sadly, when it comes to people, and in Hollywood, this is how it's always been, people let their egos get in the way. And so they are unwilling to see the truth. They're unwilling to see the reality that's very clear for them to see right in front of them. Like, I'm looking back at some of the the box office numbers because someone mentioned the movies, and what I found interesting is that actually on paper none of the films, even the originals, were like huge hits as far as net profits at the theater. I mean, afterwards we could obviously say, okay, there's obviously a lot of other revenue streams, people buying the VHS, DVD, like all that stuff, right? I'm imagining like they made tons on everything connected to the movie, right? All of the merchandising, right? Obviously that is where the money was likely made in a huge degree for it. But it got worse with the newer films because they cost, as Tom had mentioned, right, they increased the price so much, they increased their budget so much that they were still dealing with that same size audience. You had some normies starting to maybe be like, oh, let's see what this is about. And then when they dove into the world, many of them were like, I'm not really that interested. And so by the last film, Star Trek Beyond, that film lost over $100 million at the box office. And so these are, I think, just interesting, data points to point out that it's clear to me that someone like this who's in charge of a franchise, it's just like what we say in Star Wars. It's just like what we're seeing with, even to some degree, the MCU. These people in many ways not only have their egos, but also it seems have some activist bent to them, right? They want these films and these franchises to start to, more directly mention and impact culture in a way that previously had not been the case, right? Whereas before, someone who was a really talented writer could incorporate their life experience, and it could include things like more marginalized groups of people or things like that. DS9 had episodes like that, where like there was one episode where they kind of like went back in time and they were going through what it was like to be like a black man during a time when it was actually racist on Earth. And it's like, okay, that's
Far Beyond
actually,
the Stars.
Yeah, it's like, okay, that's actually an interesting concept, and they're playing it pretty well. Whereas in today's world, it's just like hitting you in the face with it every single episode, every single time. So it's not just like a one-off episode where they go into an intriguing direction. Instead, it's just so overt with the messaging. And so I don't know what's going to take at this point. Someone firing him probably would be the only thing. And if no one can fire him, then I always wonder what's going on with a lot of these stockholders, because I don't see how they don't have as much power as I feel like they should, especially when these companies are just, wasting money and devaluing their stock.
I want to point something out, though, about what you're saying about box office.
Yeah.
When they made like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, they brought in their television division to make it. Harv Bennett came in from their TV department, and they made that movie for $11 million. And it made over $70 million at the time. And that's a hugely profitable film for 1982.
Yep.
And if you look at the money, so if you go by the conventional wisdom that a movie costs 3 or 4 times, it's broken even when it's made 3 or 4 times its budget. So you look at so you get to $44 million, it's broken even. And then up to $70 million, cut that in half because that's what the studio gets. You're still looking at a pretty nice chunk of change. You're getting back, let's say you get back $15 million on an $11 million spend. That's over 100% profit. And any investor will tell you that's really good money. And so the Star Trek movies always did that kind of, Star Trek 5 didn't, but did that kind of business. And it used to be that Star Trek was made for basically a domestic audience. Germans liked it. The UK liked it. Whereas now the economics of movie making is completely different. And so Star Trek was always profitable for the amount of money, very profitable for the amount of money they were spending.
And that's
Right.
box office. What about
Yeah.
afterwards? DVD, Blu-ray.
Well, the video
Well,
cassettes
that's what I
were
was saying. That's
huge. In
probably where they
fact,
made most of their money.
Star
Star
Trek
Trek
2
was
was
the
one of the
first-
first sell-through
Yeah.
tapes. Yeah,
That and Officer
Yeah.
and the Gentleman, $39.95, and it sold
But
millions.
it's
of
funny,
copies.
the things you just said about the old films compared to the new ones and how much they make and how much they cost. Emma Watts pointed that out at the company before she left. She said these movies are basically making the same amount of money they were back in the day, but they're costing 2, 3, 4 times as much to make.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And so they were just not profitable anymore. And you're right. And you even got to that point with Star Trek 5 and 6 where the budget had gotten a little high and the return wasn't coming back anymore. Kind of like most sequels, when you get to that point, it's like, well, is it worth spending any more money? Because these movies aren't getting any cheaper to make compared to how much they're making at the box office then.
Gavin Blackburn in the chat says, "No, Rob, if a movie costs $100 million and makes $101 million, it's in profit." Look, we're talking about the negative
He's-
cost to make a movie, but the thing is, you have to market a movie. You also have studio overhead. You have
He's taking the piss out of you, Rob.
I think he's trying to. I think
making
he's
a
trying
joke.
to-
he knows the truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I just-
we know
I just-
Gavin.
I
Go
just
ahead,
want to
Dutch.
say really quick, talking about Wrath of Khan reminded me that it's time for my annual viewing of Wrath of Khan. I watch it at least once a year. It's my favorite Star Trek movie. It's probably one of my top 5 movies of all time. And I always watch it in March. And typically because of today, March 22nd, which is William Shatner's 95th birthday.
Fourth.
So I wanted
94th.
94th birthday. I want to shout out William Shatner, say happy birthday from us here at Salty Nerd.
That guy is so based. I love him so much.
Unblock me.
It's crazy. Yeah, unblock Tom, please.
Oh,
Mr.
I
Shatner.
was blocked on social media, and I made a
I
movie
didn't
with
do
him.
nothing. Yeah, you've
And,
been
uh,
in a movie with him.
yeah,
You
yeah.
made a movie with him.
He
yeah.
doesn't know that I'm blocked.
He's probably
but-
trying to extort you. You know, you can buy your way out of a William Shatner block. So
That's what he did to Doomcock.
I love
anyway-
that guy so much.
But anyway, yeah, just me and my friends, we used to get together every March and we would celebrate. We would have a Trek birthday party for Nimoy and Shatner, and
They were
we'd have
4
like
days apart.
My wife would make us a Andorian green cake with their faces really grossly painted on there and everything. It was super fun, man. We used to have. I miss all my nerd friends from back in the day, but this is it's a big day. You know,
You got new nerd fans now.
we got new nerds. I got new nerds now, but we don't do a Star Trek birthday party for Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner because their birthday, Rob, was they were like 2 weeks apart, right, or something.
No,
like
4
that.
days.
Oh, was that close? Yeah.
Yeah, it was that close, and they were the same age.
Yeah.